Hey mamas, did you know that less than 2% of babies born in the United States every year are born out of the hospital? And despite so many babies being born in the hospitals nowadays, it's important to remember that for generations and generations, women were giving birth at home. They were giving birth in the kitchen. They were giving birth in whatever space they had access to that they felt safe and protected. It's so important for moms nowadays to understand that they do have options when it comes to where they want to give birth. And so in today's podcast of the Built to Birth podcast, we are listening to Daesha's story, talking about her home birth, water birth experience. To help get this Built to Birth podcast out there for more moms to listen to and hear these positive and inspiring birth stories, make sure you go to wherever you listen to your podcasts, either Google, Apple, or Spotify, and make sure you subscribe to the Built to Birth podcast, rate it, and then write a review. So now let's listen to Daesha's home birth story. Hi, Daesha. Can you hear me fine?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just great. That's perfect. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's fun to have a conversation with the person I've been watching on YouTube for the last 5 months straight. So
Oh man, that's so funny. Yeah, I love connecting with moms. It's so funny just to be like, I don't know, I feel like we're like with so many moms, I'm like, oh, I feel like we're already friends. Like I feel like I know you, but I've never actually even met you.
It's so fun.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me. And I know kind of as a new mom, it can be like life is a little bit crazy. So thanks for just spending some time and sharing your birth story. And I'm so excited to hear it.
Yeah, of course. Happy to share it.
Good. So before we get started, do you mind sharing us a little bit about you and like your husband and kind of how you guys found out that you were pregnant?
Yeah, totally. So my name is Daesha. I am a worship leader occupationally. So I sing and play guitar for church services on the weekends. And then I'm also a fitness coach too. So those are my two biggest passions. And the fact that I get to do both of them is super fun. And then my husband is a videographer. So he does everything from lighting to podcasts to, a bunch of random fun projects, weddings, things like that. And let's see, when we were trying to get pregnant, we weren't not trying, if that makes sense. So we were kind of in a place where it was kind of funny. I wanted to wait a long time about 2 to 5 years into marriage before we started talking about having kids. And we had this one day where Jared, if we had a honeymoon baby, he would have been thrilled. So he was basically waiting for me to give him the okay in terms of like starting the family. And there was one day where he sent me this video of a girl who was, she'd had a kid sooner than what she wanted and was listing out all these reasons why she was super grateful that she had that kid sooner. And I continued to explore YouTube a little bit after, and within the hour and a half of watching all of those videos, I had completely changed my mind, 180 degrees. And he came home that day and I was like, I'm ready to have kids. And so that was my moment where things just like seemed to make sense in terms of timing and what we were looking for. And within the month, we got pregnant. And I mean, he was keeping up with me in terms of like whether I had never been on birth control. So we didn't really think it'd be a huge issue to get pregnant, like right when we wanted to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, within the month of starting to try, we were pregnant and we were both thrilled about it. And I still stand by my decision that I changed when I changed my mind 9 months ago. So we're really, really happy. Yeah.
Good. That is so special. So how long were you guys married then before you decided to get pregnant?
We were married just under a year and a half. We're actually going to come up on 2 years at the end of this month. So we're getting close.
Early congratulations. That's so sweet.
Yeah,
I love
thank you.
Yeah. How did you tell him that you were pregnant?
Well, it's funny. The timing of it actually wasn't super great. He knew that I was like running late and that my period was late. At the time, I was in Colorado because I'm in Arlington, Virginia right now. But I was in Colorado for a friend's wedding, and I decided that's where my family is too. So it was actually really special. I found out that I was pregnant, took the test in Colorado, and got to share that with my
Oh,
family in person, which was really fun. But I
yeah.
called him and FaceTimed him when he was like in the middle of a work like conference thing. So he was like surrounded by all these other people and in this like really fancy outfit for this professional thing that he was a part of. So he was like, he was very excited, and we had already talked about this and we kind of knew it was coming. But the moment that I did tell him, he was like, I'm really excited, but I can't like, he couldn't do
Can't
anything or
jump
like
up and down. He
celebrate in
can't
that
hug
moment.
anyone.
Exactly. So luckily we had the conversation prior to already, and he was like, he knew it was coming and was really excited about it. So
Oh, that's so sweet. That's amazing. So then as
yeah.
you were kind of preparing for your birth experience, like what did you do to prepare? And like I know you ended up having a home birth. Was that something that you wanted to do from the get-go, or what kind of like led you to your birth experience?
Yeah, I think when I first found out that I was pregnant, I didn't think a ton about the birthing experience itself at first. But I am a researcher. So I did a lot of
Okay.
reading, I did a lot of YouTube videos, and really just tried to get a well rounded understanding of what all of my options were.
Mm,
My mom delivered me and all of my four siblings naturally. So I initially had the idea of like, okay, my mom did it 5 times. I can do it. And then also just understanding that like the hospital industry wasn't taking over the birthing experience until very recently in the last few
mm,
decades. And so understanding that like women did it naturally for thousands of years before this, I was like, I think I'd like to like, I don't know, respect what women have been doing for a long
yeah.
time and recognize that my body was made to do this.
Yeah.
And so that said, I kind of only really knew that that was the one thing I wanted to prioritize
Mm,
um, 9 months down the road. But I think the more that I read a lot from Ina May Gaskins. And I think a lot of her writings really inspired me to take more of an approach that would prioritize like an environment that would make me feel really comfortable
yeah.
and
She's
really,
amazing.
yeah, and really help me stay relaxed. And ultimately, after I did all of the research, I kind of came to the conclusion that a water birth at home would be the thing that I would feel the most like relaxed with,
Mm,
and the most
mm-hmm.
confident in, the most empowered with. So after a good portion of research, it probably took me a few months just to get through all of the readings and stuff. And I got to a point where I was like, I think this is what I want. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So do you feel like you like most of your time in pregnancy was spent preparing like for the experience that you wanted during birth, or was it a lot of like how can I like prepare my body? How can I prepare my mind? Like what do you feel like you most prioritized while you were preparing for your birth?
ooh, that's a good question. I think I think there were different phases to it. So I'm trying to even remember like what order I went in. I think the first part was just studying like how much or like what how I should be taking care of my body first while
Mm,
baby's inside of me. And being a fitness coach, I already had a pretty good understanding of like body awareness and good nutrition and, you know, exercising, things like that.
yeah.
Though I didn't do a ton of training while I was actually pregnant, it was pretty fun to see like the work that I had done consistently over the last 5 to 7 years of working out, and just being able to watch my body adapt to all of the
Yeah.
changes really well.
Mhm.
Um, but I think initially a lot of it was with nutrition and understanding how that really affects baby's development and the things that
Mm.
she needs. I think after that, and the closer I got to the birthing experience, the more I was like, "Oh, I should probably figure out what I want and what's going to happen." And so I think the next phase was really focusing on you know, what it looks like for what the history of birthing has been, how, like, what
Mm.
role a hospital has played in that. And then what other people have done kind of off the cuff. I learned that, like, not many people actually do home births. It's like 1% of
Yeah.
women in the United
Yeah.
States, which is crazy to me. And so that was really intriguing. And I was super
Mm.
interested in seeing what was appealing on both sides.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it was probably the closer I got to the birthing experience, the more I was like, all right, I should probably do a little bit more research here. And then once that was covered, I think the focus after that was really, especially towards the end, was really focusing on mentally preparing. And it was a little bit, obviously, the situation with the whole pandemic is not ideal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the transition time that it gave me to be at home and to really get used to, going from a family of 2 to a family of 3, I had plenty of time to think about it. One could argue I had enough time to overthink about it. So it was a battle that I was trying to weigh back and forth a little bit. But at the same time, it gave me plenty of time to kind of come to terms with the transition, to work on relaxing and just to like sit down for a little bit, breathe well, focus on what it looks like to just let your body fall limp so that like when the contractions did come, they could just do their thing. And I would have been in a place where I was confident that I could let my body surrender to what was going to be happening. So I think I had a lot of confidence in my ability to work with breathing and body control, but there were definitely a few times where, I mean, it's so nice too. Like it basically puts you to sleep. So I got a few good naps out of it too towards the end.
There you go.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
No, yeah.
So I think that was
feel
kind of the progression of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like for a lot of people, this COVID crisis has, it's thrown everyone through a loop. But I also feel like for a lot of us, it's been a blessing in disguise to kind of help us kind of step back and feel like and understand like, okay, this is how I step back from work and all of the distractions and really be able to focus on, especially for pregnant moms, focus on my body, focus on my baby, focus on preparation for this birth experience and then all of motherhood. So I feel like in some ways like it is a little bit of a blessing in disguise, this whole crisis that we're experiencing. But that's so amazing that you had already kind of been planning for a home birth from the beginning, because I know that that's been a little bit of a scramble for a lot of moms who are like now like, oh, I don't want to give birth in a hospital. Like, let me try to give birth at home. And, whether there are moms listening to this right now who are, trying to figure that out right now, I feel like you can give a lot of insight because you had a home birth. And so why don't you now share with us just your birth experience? Walk us through, when you were like, oh, I think this is labor, and then all the way to the birth of your baby.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll actually start a little bit before that. I had to wait a lot longer than I thought I would have to. I originally, my due date was March 31st with our little girl. Her name is Jayla.
Jayla, that's sweet.
Thank you. And I was like, I'm an overachiever and like to do things sooner rather than later. I will do my homework 2 weeks early so that I don't have to worry about it for later. And so I was like, this little girl is probably going to come out a week early. So we're just going to prepare and be ready. And then she ended up being 11 days late. So it was a long 2 or 3 weeks of just like sitting around and being like, where the heck is this girl? And so we spent a good couple weeks trying all of the natural induction methods. Like I did so much research. We did the tea, we did walks, we did stretching and making sure I was active. We did the midwife brew, we did membrane sweeps, and just everything. I was like, she's not coming. I don't know what's going on. But luckily she did. And I was able to kind of avoid having to transfer into a hospital, because if we got to 42 weeks, we would have had to go into a hospital. So I was slightly concerned that we were like getting a little close to the end date. But we did wake up Saturday morning. It was April 11th when I woke up at 5:30 with contractions. And beforehand, I had a lot of Braxton Hicks happening, but there was no cramping or any like pain really associated with it. But I woke up that morning and I was like, oh, this is new. This is like progress finally.
Yeah.
And so, we ended up, I went through contractions for about 45 minutes just to make sure that it was like consistent and that it was strong enough to the point where it was worth waking my husband up that early. So it was about
Mm-hmm.
6:15 when I finally turned around and I was like, all right, babe, time to wake up. We're doing this thing. And
Yeah.
I know that in all the reading that I had done, I realized that it was super valuable to be moving and up and around and making sure you're trying different positions and things like that to help labor progress.
Yeah.
But I was at the point where I was just like, I cannot imagine what it would be like to try to support myself standing and find a comfortable position while I'm going through these contractions. The breathing helped a ton, and laying down
Mm,
in bed actually was what served me really well in early labor.
yeah.
And so I felt bad because my midwife was on the phone and she was like, well, if you could like try to get up, that'd be really great. And I was like, I really don't want to.
Yeah.
um, just because, and like it was doable, but it was so much easier for me to lay in bed and just imagine my body like sinking into the bed, complete
Mm,
relaxation, so that when those contractions came, I was able to be 100% relaxed and just surrender my
yeah.
body to what was going on. So I labored most of the time. It was probably 3-ish hours, 3 or 4 hours before the midwives came, and I was laying down most of the time. And there
Yeah.
were times where I tried to get up and go to the restroom, and then I would have a contraction on the toilet, and then at the sink, and then at the door as I was trying to leave. Intervals kept getting shorter. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
progressing at a relatively quick rate to the point where I
Yeah.
was okay to justify laying down a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
You're like, I deserve this.
yeah, exactly. And so I also tried to eat a little bit at the very beginning. I ended up throwing it up, so
Mm,
that didn't last for very long.
yeah.
But I was really glad to at least have some kind of awareness that that was a thing, because if I didn't have a friend that told me, hey, this is what happened to me, it's happened to some other moms, just a heads
Yeah.
up, you might experience it. That was really helpful to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Another friend told me about having the shakes too. When contractions
Yeah.
started, my body did start shaking a little bit. And it wasn't anything weird, but it would have kind of taken me off guard if I didn't know
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
that
so
was
many
kind of
moms,
part of
it's
the
like,
deal
am I
sometimes.
supposed to, like, am I cold? Like, what's going on? Why am I
I
shaking?
know.
Or why am I nauseous? So, yeah, very common symptoms. But if you don't expect them to come, you're like, is this normal? Am I okay?
Totally. Yeah. So it was nice to have kind of had the heads up on both of those things. So when it happened, I was like, this is no big deal. This happens to everyone. I'll just kind of go with
Yeah.
the flow and, follow where my body leads.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's see. I stayed in bed most of the time. I had a list of things that I wanted to do to kind of set up our little living room area. We have a 1-bedroom apartment, so we needed to move things around a little bit to make sure we had space for everything. And I was under the impression that I would have the capacity to help put all of those things together. So
Yeah.
my poor husband ended up taking the brunt of the work. So while I was laying in bed laboring, he was like trying to fix everything, and he got my essential oils going, and he put my music on, and he, reorganized our apartment and got the pool ready and things like that.
Hmm.
So he totally crushed it. He did an amazing job kind of setting up the atmosphere, which was awesome.
Good. Yeah.
So then our midwife came probably around 9:30 in the morning. And not too long after that, we did my first cervical check. And the first cervical check that I had, I think a day before, I was at about 2 centimeters dilated already. And
Okay.
so by the time I had gone through this early labor period, we checked again, and I was already at 8 or 9 centimeters at that point.
Wow.
And I personally was a little bit shocked and very pleasantly surprised, because I
Yeah.
thought that like majority of labor was basically this 0 to 10 centimeters
Mm.
dilation journey. And so the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I'd only been laboring for 4 hours and was already there, I was like, this is going to be a piece of cake. Like, I'm so pumped. And these
Yeah.
contractions, like, obviously they were strong,
Yeah.
but they were very manageable. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty encouraged at that point to be like, okay, I definitely thought it was going to be a lot worse than this.
Hmm.
Um, and then, so the pool hadn't been 100% like set up at that point. So that was the kickstart. Everyone was like, oh, we gotta get
We got to
ready.
get the show on the road.
Exactly. So the pool got pumped up and got filled up with this nice warm water. So once that was all said and done, I ended up, oh, and I was GBS positive as well. So I got a little
Okay.
antibiotic before I went into the pool. And then getting into the pool for the first time was probably the most relieving feeling I have ever experienced in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I like, even the thought when I was pregnant, understanding that I couldn't go into a hot tub, I don't have a jacuzzi immediately accessible to me at all times, but just the fact that I had to the thought of giving that up was such a sacrifice because I love jacuzzis. And so this felt like an early celebration because it's 100 degrees. And I was like, oh, this is so nice.
Yeah, I know. Water during labor is just it's a game changer. Like a best friend. Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone who's thinking about using hydrotherapy, I would highly, highly recommend it. And I was on the verge of tears when I got in there. It was so nice. And this was probably one of the first really challenging parts of labor though, because mentally I knew that obviously every pregnancy and every birth story is so different and not one of them looks the same. But with my initial impression of having the 0 to 10 centimeters dilation journey, I was under the impression that was the hard part. You've gotten through most of it. The biggest percentage of your birth laboring journey is pretty much done. And then the transition birth piece can obviously take some time, but it'll take a shorter amount of time. So understanding that, I went into the pool thinking that things were ready to happen. And then I ended up stalling for about 2 hours in there.
Okay.
And so mentally, that was a really challenging piece for me. I started having all of these doubts and thoughts of man, if I'm making my midwives wait, do they think that I'm going to be able to do this? And contractions at one point, I remember telling people or telling my husband that the contractions started to almost tease me a little bit, or that's how it felt. They seemed to get shorter and they weren't as powerful. And the intervals in between them actually seemed to get a little bit longer. And so in the moment where I felt like I wasn't strong enough to really help pushing progress or move forward, looking back on it, I actually recognize it as a time of my body saying, hey, we just spent a lot of effort the last 4 hours getting you to 10 centimeters. We just need to take a breather before we, need to use all of this energy for the pushing stage that's coming.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple of times in between contractions where I was actually able to 100% escape all labor pains for a good minute. And so I was just hanging out in the pool, enjoying my jacuzzi. And I probably even dozed off a couple times in between contractions. So it was this moment of total serenity, which I did not expect at all. And I think if this were to happen again, I would probably be in more of a position to accept that a little bit more because I was so mentally ready to progress and to keep going that I didn't fully just be okay, I'm just going to chill here for a second, you know?
Yeah.
So, but also looking back in hindsight, it was really good timing because my sweet husband, my favorite snack right now is strawberries and dark chocolate. And he was going to heat some dark chocolate up in the microwave, but he didn't realize how small of a time interval I always use to heat it up. And so he ended up burning the chocolate and it filled our entire apartment with smoke.
Oh no. Oh my goodness.
So as I was laboring in the pool, stalling, my midwives and Jared were running around the apartment, opening up all the windows, throwing the microwave out the window. So in terms of me needing attention, I was so low maintenance at that point. They were able to handle that super well and everything worked out. So in hindsight, the timing really did work out pretty well. Yeah, just a little bit. As if things weren't exciting enough. And then after that 2 hour period of stalling, resting, recovering, getting ready, then things started to progress. I started to feel that natural, my body's just bearing down. We're ready to go. I felt like I was able to work with my contractions at that point. And at that point, I was able to start really working with them and feeling some progress of her slowly moving deeper or further down into my pelvis. And the pushing, again, a challenging part, especially when you're not doing it medicated, you feel everything. And I think to some extent it sucks that you have to
Mm.
feel everything because it is a challenging thing to go through. On the other hand, I also loved how aware I was of everything happening. Like I could
Yeah.
feel the back and forth motion of her head as I was
Mhm.
pushing. I could feel the power of my contractions and like was really able to work well with them. I could feel
Yeah.
like my skin stretching, which was hard, but it also gave me such a keen understanding of what was too much and what wasn't too
Yeah.
much. Um,
Exactly.
so there was a lot of like, there was a lot of tension of like, this is really good and I'm glad I have this, but holy crap, this really
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah, it's
um,
intense.
it is a really intense moment. And so I think it was probably in total about 2 hours of pushing, but the more intense piece probably took closer to 30 minutes.
Okay.
And it was just this like this back and forth ordeal, slowly trying to make
Mhm.
sure that she came out well. Um,
Mm.
and I did feel myself tear, which was hard.
Mm.
But I mean, looking back, I think I wouldn't trade that pain for a um a lack of control, I guess, or a lack of
Mm.
awareness of what was going
Mm.
on. So I would definitely
Wow.
like do it that way again.
Yeah.
Um and when she was born, we were still in the water at that point. So her head came out, and visually, also just from like an expectation standpoint, I had the understanding that the head was going to be the hardest part. And so I was like, great, she's done. And so I think within that single contraction, head came out and I heard it. Someone was like, oh my gosh, your head's out. And I was like, great, the rest of her's coming out right now. Like we are doing this thing. And so it was all within that same contraction. I just like went hard and I pushed and pushed and pushed. And I just I saw it in my head. I was like, there are her shoulders, there's her body, the rest of her out, get out of me. Um,
Yeah.
and that was a very relieving feeling at that point, just
Mm.
to feel everything just like end. It
Yeah.
was done.
Yeah.
And so she plopped in the water. I turned around, picked her up, and held her in my arms for the first time. And that was such a surreal moment. Like, as a first time mom, you know that a baby's growing inside of you and you're following the development of it and reading about it. But there is nothing that compares to that first moment where you're like, oh my
Yeah.
word, this is
Yeah.
actually real. Um,
Yeah,
so
so
that was
special.
super crazy and so fun. And like, I know that there's a lot that goes on in regards to the hormones that are, raging through your body and changing so many things. But man, I have never felt a love so strong for someone before. I
Yeah.
love my husband, but I love my baby, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
It's
it's different
crazy.
too after, all of that like intense work, that challenging work that you're doing to
Mhm.
finally see like literally the fruit of your labor, just to be like, "Oh my gosh, like finally I like have you here." And it does produce such an intense amount of love. And so, I totally understand where it's like a love that you could never even explain, because it's like, with our loved ones, we grow to love them over time. And,
Yeah,
I feel like every day we love them more. But like with our babies, it's like, I've never even met you before. And I just
I
like love
know.
you an infinite amount, it feels like, from the very beginning. And it's such a
Yeah, it's
special
like an
moment.
immediate thing. It's crazy.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
sweet. I
Yeah. So
love it.
we had that moment. Then we hung out in the pool for a little bit, but my midwives didn't want me to deliver the placenta in the water. So that was an
Hmm.
interesting thing, trying to figure out how to hold my child while three people helped me like get out of the pool. um,
Yeah.
and we moved to the couch after that. And within 20 minutes, I delivered the placenta, which did not hurt in any way whatsoever.
Hmm.
And then at the same time, my baby within that 20 minutes also bobbed her way around and eventually self-attached, and we started feeding for the first
Wow.
time.
Oh.
And so everything happened like pretty quickly after the fact. Um, I think one of the tougher parts for me to manage was the aftermath of the birth. And I didn't fully understand what some of those things looked like. And so I ended up, just for a various number of reasons, I was mildly anemic or like borderline anemic going into the birth. So just for
Okay.
the sake of helping with clotting issues and things like that, I ended up going on Pitocin afterwards, just to help with the
Okay.
contracting and things like that. Um, and so the labor pains that I thought I had escaped once and for all, like kind of came back.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a bummer to have to go like through that. And I had to get like an abdominal massage to make sure that things indeed were contracting. And so just having a sensitive body after going through labor and then having to go through more things was not fun. So,
and for, all the moms who are listening to this and maybe going into their birth experience for the first time, like that is so routine where, and you can always have the option to say no to that Pitocin, but it often does help prevent, that postpartum bleeding. And it does help with that blood clotting, but it does make those afterbirth sensations a little bit more intense. But it is pretty routine. And then, those that fundal massage it's no joke.
It really, yeah, it's not. So I think if I had known and expected that, or was just more aware of the possibility that that could happen, I think it would have been easier for me to manage. But because I didn't know what to expect, it kind of took me off guard a little bit. So I just had to process through that a little bit. And then I got stitches afterwards. So once the midwives were like done with everything, I was like, awesome. See you later. I am so over like being touched and like all these different things. I just want to hold my baby. But I think honestly, that's one of the huge things about being at home was once everything was done, they just said, okay, we'll see you later. And then they left, and we didn't have to worry about like putting baby in the car seat and getting all of our things or having everything packed. We were in our comfort spot. We knew where everything was. We could sleep in our own bed that night. You're
already in your own space.
Exactly. So that was super special. And I also loved how when the midwives were helping me with the recovery process after the birth, my husband was needed to take care of the little baby. So instead of necessarily being, while nurses and doctors are phenomenal at what they do, I loved that the dad was needed in that moment. And he was really able to connect with her and spend time with her in her first few hours. So that was really special for the whole purpose of like having everything done at home. And I absolutely love it. So
it's so family centered at home.
Exactly.
You and your husband and your baby are really the focal point, and everything kind of is revolving around you, which is really, really sweet to have.
Yeah, exactly. So we, at that point, slept for probably about 4 hours before our shift schedule started up after that. And we had a couple visits from our midwife and birthing assistant after like the couple days following. But yeah, that's basically the main premise of the story there.
I love it. And how old is your daughter now?
She is, she'll be 2 weeks on Saturday.
Oh my goodness. So
I guess that's tomorrow.
Fresh.
So,
oh my goodness. Yeah. I love it. So sweet. Well, I love how I feel like a lot of your birth story, you're talking about like surrendering. And I think it's interesting, like as a like physical fitness person, so much of what we do is like strength training, like it's like all of this like hold on to things, like I'm in control of my body. And so it's so funny to experience labor and birth where it is so much, it's not like you're controlling it, like you don't want tight muscles, you want everything super, super relaxed. And so I love just how you were saying like you had to train yourself to surrender and let your body experience those surges and let it flow through you. And I just love how you kept using the word surrender. That was so cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it was an important lesson because it's definitely, like you said, it kind of goes against the grain of what you're used to doing, especially when it comes to controlling what your body does. Because I think if you're an intentional weightlifter, like you are very intentionally like squeezing certain muscles at certain times and like, learning how to control different pieces of your body. So in a sense, it was really different to be like, okay, my body knows what it's doing. This isn't anything that I can, propel forward or instigate, especially in that like 2-hour stall period that I had. I ended up having to say, okay, you're in control. I will do what you need to do. And that always.
And I feel like every mom at some point in their labor has to come to that point where it's like, okay, like I'm relinquishing control, like my body is going to do this. My baby is going to do this. And it's kind of a hard moment to come to sometimes in that labor experience. You're like, okay, like like I'm letting go. My hands are open now. Do you feel like
Totally.
there was a point in your labor where you kind of like hit a wall and you're like, okay, I just have to like, get through this in order to get to the other side? Was that like around that stall time, or was there a different time
Hmm.
in your labor where you felt that, or did you feel that at all?
That's a good question. I don't know if I ever felt a wall per se. Um, but I think the right before I was going into the pushing stage and starting to feel some of that pain, I think I would refer to it as this catch-22 piece where it's like the only way you can work with your body, inevitably there is going to be like pain. And like heck, if there's some ladies out there who are able to push and feel zero pain, I covet you. Like that's incredible. But like it is something like at one point you have to say, hey, like this isn't something I necessarily want to do or want to experience physically, but the baby's got to come out, and this is the only way the baby's gonna come out. And so
Yeah.
I think if there was a wall that I ever hit, that was probably the mental tension that felt most like a wall, where I was like, this is just something I have to do at this point.
Mm,
And I've actually had to revisit that moment a few times after the birth. I I take a little bit of extra time to process emotionally what I'm going through. I journal a lot. And obviously, in that moment, I don't have time to journal about the things
of
that I'm
course,
feeling.
yeah.
And so there have been a few moments post birth that I've had to give myself to really process the things that I was feeling. Um, because there was a moment where I probably, if I had the time, I like would have cried about it. And so there have been a couple
Yeah.
times like after where I was taking a nice long shower that my husband blessed me with. And I just took a moment to say, hey, I need to acknowledge the fact that I was like stressing out a little bit in that moment.
Mm,
And so giving myself the space to cry and to emotionally process the things that I didn't have time to process then in that moment has been really helpful, just in terms of like the healing process of
yeah.
like recognizing how I felt and being able to like provide myself with the space to
Yeah.
fully feel that. So that's been really helpful for me too. And like has allowed me to see the birthing experience in a more positive light, because I have been able to process everything really well. So
Good. That's
I think that was
awesome. Yeah,
probably like the biggest wall.
yeah. Yeah, and I think every woman, it's so important to process through that birth story, and I always encourage moms to write it out and, like look back and remember those things and feel the feelings that like are evoked from that experience, and
Mhm.
process through those and work through the harder emotions, and then relish the really positive ones. But I feel like there are so many positive things that we can draw from any kind of birth experience. And so that's awesome that you are taking the time to process through this birth experience that you've just had. You said you journal a lot. Is there, is that like the way that you're processing through this? Or like, what are some tips that you would give moms who, should or can be like processing through their birth stories?
Yeah, totally. Journaling is huge for me, only for multiple reasons. One, um, primarily because I can be in my head a lot, but so much clarity will come to me through actually writing it out, because I'm able to
Yeah.
look back and read through things and add different details and kind of edit as I go.
Hmm.
And I used to handwrite a lot, but now I'm typing because my brain just works a little bit too quickly for my hand to catch up. And
Yeah.
I have this app that I would recommend. It's called Day One, and I use it. It like interchangeably will go from your laptop to your phone, and you can use it on different devices and update it from different places. And that's been super helpful for me. And so I will journal it out to simply find clarity in things, to kind of come to little revelations here and there through the process of writing it out. But then I also
And do
think
you
the
write
other,
it out on your app, on that Day One app?
yeah.
Okay, awesome.
So it was probably a couple days after the birth where I just took a couple hours and like I told the whole story. And then I also had questions that some people asked me that I thought were really thought provoking. And so I wrote down all of those questions, like, would you do it the exact same way as you experienced it? If you could change things, were there anything you could change? would you want to use an epidural after experiencing it naturally? And so I was just able to like go through all of those things and just kind of reflect on the
Yeah.
experience that I had, the story that I told, and the, ultimately what my thoughts were on each of those things.
Yeah.
And then I think once I was able to write all of that out, now I have that as a keepsake to look back on when I have kiddo number 2 and number 3 and
Yeah.
however many kids we end up having. And also just seeing, like, I don't have the greatest memory. I'll be the first to admit that. So being able to preserve the details of that day is a huge priority for me. So being able to look back after 50 years and, being able to read from my point of view,
Yeah.
the fresh details of how it happened. I also just want to be able to remember it really well and to have something to
Yeah.
remind me of, you know, what the story was like. So,
Yeah, that's so sweet. I love that. Yeah, that's so powerful. Um, what do you feel like was the best thing, like looking back on your birth experience as you're journaling through this? What do you feel like was the best thing that your husband did to support you during this whole process?
ooh, that's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the strawberries and dark chocolate. It didn't work out as well as he thought it did, but in the moment when I heard that that's what he was doing, like I was like, "Oh, you know me. You know like what
Yeah.
would have meant a lot. You've like been observing me over the last few days and thought that that would have been something that really would have helped." Um and then I think there was a moment in that stalling period where I verbalized to him, I was like, "Hey, I'm feeling pretty defeated. Like,
Mm,
I feel like I should be progressing and I'm not. And I don't know what to do about this." And
yeah.
in that moment, like throughout the entire laboring process, he was very present with me, which was the one thing that I asked him. I was like, I don't know what all I'm going to need in the moment in terms of positioning or, ideas or things like that.
Mhm.
All of that is subject to change. But if I can just have you be present and like just be with me, that's going to be really important. And I
Yeah.
think in that moment, that was mostly what I needed from him. And so to be able to like be super vulnerable with him there and say, I am feeling defeated by this moment. Um, he grabbed my hand and came close and prayed with me for a moment there. And I think that was just the fact that he was available and present and willing to like lean into that moment with me, and feel
Yeah.
for a second. I think that's probably the one moment that stood out to me the most. And yeah, really touched me when I was looking back and processing on everything. I think that was a pretty standout moment.
Yeah, yeah. Feel like so many partners are like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm afraid to do the wrong thing. And I always just encourage like partners. I'm just like, just be present like your husband
Yeah.
was for you. It's like, just be close by, try different things. And if mama doesn't like it, she'll let you know. But just be
Hmm.
close by, be present, be ready for, whatever is next. And so that's so sweet that he did just what you needed, and that was just having him close by and just being with you every step of the way and knowing you so well. And I think that's like such a big thing that partners bring into the birth space, is just like knowing the mama who's in labor so well. And it's like
Yeah.
no one else can bring that into the birth experience except for them. Like a doula can't do that, a midwife can't do that, a nurse can't do that. The only
Hmm.
person who knows and loves you in that kind of way is your partner. And that's so sweet that he was able to, be that for you. And it's amazing that he was able to do that in the context of being home as well, so that it, adds an element of like more comfort because it was a familiar place to both of you. And so, he had that freedom to go to the kitchen and burn the
Exactly. Yep.
chocolate and no, that's so
Exactly.
sweet. And it is really the thought that counts,
It
really.
is.
You're just like, oh, wow, that's so sweet that, he did know me so well. So I love that.
Yeah, totally. And I
Yeah.
think it was funny I remember in one of your previous videos that we watched, learning to not take things personally when women don't want you to do a certain thing. We did have a moment like that too. Cause I told him prior to, like, I mean, I don't know what woman doesn't love kissing her husband, but I was like, hey, if this is gonna help like produce hormonally like things that will help to progress labor, like I'm
Yeah.
probably gonna want to kiss you a lot. But there was one moment where he was like leaning in to give me a nice smooch, but I was not having it. And I like pushed his face away. I was like, get out of my face. And I
That's
apologized after the
hilarious.
fact. I was like, I'm so sorry. I told you that that's something I probably would have wanted, and you like went for it, and I did not want it at all. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, learning to not take things personally when you like offer things either, like, is huge. Luckily, he just
Yeah.
like threw it to the side, was like, okay, whatever. She obviously is not interested
Good.
in that.
I love it.
But yeah, I thought that was funny that we ended up having a moment like that too.
Yeah, there's always at least one or two funny moments when it comes to labor. So what do
Totally.
you feel like you've learned the most from your birth experience?
Oh, that's also a good question. Hmm. I think I think there is something to be said about how you can't deny the design of our bodies. Like, I understood that going into it and read a lot of things that was basically like, hey, you're created to do this. Like, and I remember you giving an example of like the orange, pushing an orange through your nostril metaphor
Mhm.
of giving birth.
Yeah.
When in reality, like our body is like fashioned to do this. Where obviously
Mhm.
a nostril is not meant to do that kind of job.
Yeah.
So I think being able to like know it is one thing, but actually being able to experience it and come to terms with, wow, we were created to do this. Like
Yeah.
this is intentional design. And being able to just witness that firsthand, I think really
Mm.
helped to really, make things click and just to give me a new understanding of what that meant. And a
Mm.
whole new appreciation for it too. Just like being able to finally be in a position where I wasn't trying to control things anymore, and I didn't necessarily have to be intentional about really doing anything.
Yeah.
But it gave me a new insight into what it meant to pay attention to what my body was doing and where it was leading me. And I
Mm.
think, as a fitness coach, there is an element of that. Like, I have to make sure that my body feels okay to do the workout that I'm about to do. And, I'll be tracking how my body responds to certain foods,
Yeah.
noting intolerances and things like that. But this was like a whole new level of coming to understanding, like, okay, what's my body saying and how do
Yeah.
I respond to that? How do I lean into the ways that it's working? So I
Mm.
think that was probably it's kind of hard. Uh, it's not like a proven point lesson that you can really teach anyone, but it comes from actually experiencing it. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it really does like give you a whole new appreciation for the body that you have and what it's
Yeah.
capable of doing.
Yeah, totally. It is pretty amazing what the female body can do, that it can grow a life and then birth life. It's
It is
so, so
fascinating.
incredible. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I love it. It's so amazing. Um, well, if there was one thing that you could, encourage or one tip you could give expecting mamas, what would it be?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just kind of play off of that previous answer. Like, you are fully designed to do this. And whether you choose to use medication or not, like, your
Mm,
body knows exactly what it's doing. And I think if mamas out there are hoping to do a natural birth, like, there are moments in there where you do think maybe this is too much, but I just want to affirm
mm,
the fact that like there is purpose in how our bodies work, and
yeah.
we are fully created to do it this way. And then I guess the other thing I would encourage you to do is just give yourself the space to process afterwards.
Mm,
I think that's so important. Like, and my labor took 10, 11 hours in total, I think. We started at 5:30 and she was born close to 4 in the afternoon. And so for some women, they have a little bit more time to think about it. But I also think you're just experiencing so much in the moment. Like, you don't have a lot of
yeah.
capacity to like make that head to heart connection and fully
Yeah.
come to terms with how you see that experience and how you felt during every moment. Basically, like, carve out some time to process everything that happened. Give yourself the space to cry about things,
Mm,
about hard moments that you weren't able to process, like in the moment as you were experiencing it. And then I would also just encourage you, like, write the story out. Make sure you can use it as a keepsake. I know that I've given it to some of my other friends, and they've really benefited from hearing different parts of the story. And, it's helped them to shape some of the decisions that they're planning to make in their future births. So it serves a lot of purposes. So I think that couple hours would be really worth the time and effort.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I love that you're sharing your birth story with, those around you, but then also on this platform with a lot of mamas who are going to hear it, because you're right. Like, there's so much we can glean from other people's birth stories for our own experiences, as we're planning them or processing through them. And I just think it's such a valuable tool to add into your preparation for birth, is hearing these birth stories that are true, that are from mamas just like the rest of us, and so thank you again for sharing your birth story. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think that's about it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us again. Seriously, it was such a special story, and congratulations on your little girl. I'm sure that you are enjoying those newborn snuggles so much.
They are the best. They make the whole thing worth it, for sure.
I know. They do. It's a good thing they come out cute.
I know.
Makes all that hard work worth it. Well, thank you again, Daesha, for sharing your story, and hopefully I will talk to you again in the future.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for letting me share.
Yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye. Well, mamas, I hope you loved hearing Daesha's birth story as much as I did. It's so great being able to hear so many different perspectives and different birth stories. No birth is the same. Daesha talked a lot about surrendering to her birth experience and really trusting that her body and baby were going to do what they needed to in order for baby to be born. And this is so important to remember as you are approaching your labor experience as well. Daesha also talked about processing through her birth story, because there are elements of birth that are uncontrollable and unpredictable. And so being able to go back and come to terms with those things and work through the emotions of birth are so important. I hope that you are able to learn something and be inspired by Daesha's birth story. I'm so glad that you are here with us listening to it. And remember, if you are able to, make sure you go to the Built to Birth podcast on either Apple, Google, or Spotify so that you can rank it, subscribe, and then write a review so that more people are able to listen to these positive and empowering birth stories from mamas just like you. So thanks for being with me in this one, and I will see you in the next one.